how do we understand migration? How do we think about this topic? What sort of images and media and art and the like do we see, and how does that shape the way people talk about migration, and vice versa? How is that shaped by kind of the public conversation about it? And I think, that's obviously really salient today when folks who have moved are, in a lot of cases, being villainized and victimized.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Dr. Katie Fiorella shares the evolution of Cornell's Migrations Program and its continued benefits and importance for the Cornell community and the wider world.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelika Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, we're joined by Katie Fiorella, director of the Cornell Migrations Program. We will discuss the policies and outcomes related to the movement of living things across borders and learn about how this initiative has developed since we first discussed it in 2020.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Katie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And we're delighted to have you and talk all things migrations.
Yes, but before we talk about that, let's have you tell us about yourself. What is your background and path with languages, and what do you do here at Cornell?
Yeah, so here at Cornell, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health, which is part of the vet school, the Cornell College of Veterinary Medicine. And the public health program grew in CVM because there's a long history of thinking about how public health fits in with animal health, and both from an animal model perspective, from food safety perspectives, a whole host of interactions there. And our program thinks a lot about the ways that food systems and infectious disease and other dimensions fit into the challenges that we face in our world today. And so my work, personally, my background's in environmental science and public health. And so I think a lot about food systems and particularly small-scale fisheries where people are often moving to harvest, catch, to access resources.
Sure.
And in these contexts, the topic of migration has become more and more important. And so my work has moved more and more in these directions, too, thinking about how climate might be impacting folks in these communities and beyond. So my background with language, I learned Spanish when I was in college and high school, and I am not terribly proficient. And I spent a lot of time working in Western Kenya when I was in graduate school. And there I learned Duluo, which is the local language in the Western Kenyan region that I was working in. I stayed with a family when I was doing my research, and they are really the source of my language instruction, which was a wonderful way to learn.
Very cool. So we first heard about the migrations program here at Cornell a few years ago in one of our episodes with Rachel Beatty-Riedel. How has the program grown and evolved in the past 4.5 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the migrations program started out as a global grand challenge as a part of the provost's office. It was this process that really thought about what are some of the big topics that Cornell is well positioned to have researchers tackle and are really important places where we can be thinking. So Rachel and a host of other folks who are really involved at that early onset of the program worked really hard to bring that topic to the forefront on campus. And there was a lot of energy around it, and also an award from the Mellon Foundation that really supported researchers to come together to ask questions about migration. And so I was one of those researchers that started as a grantee thinking about some of these questions related to migrations. And as that energy on campus grew, it became clear that it sort of needed a more permanent home. And so the migrations program just last year moved into the Einaudi Center. And so now it's housed in the Einaudi Center as a part of their programming. This is also a place where lots of the area studies programs are, where our peace and conflict studies is as well. So in Einaudi, it's one of these more cross-cutting programs that, it transcends physical place and international and domestic topics. But it's been really nice for it to sort of find a footing there and be part of there.
So how does the program define migrations? What is the focus and impact of that word on what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I think the definition of migration differs across disciplines to some degree. And one of the things that we're really trying to do is bring together different disciplines that are thinking about the movement of people and animals, increasingly of diseases and other things that move around our world. And so in the most general terms, it's really about the movement of things around space. Sometimes this involves crossing international borders. Sometimes this links to certain types of legal statuses. And certainly we have faculty across campus that think about those really particular dimensions of things. For example, the law school has a program thinking about immigration and human rights. But we think about it really in the most general sense, trying to broaden the umbrella in which people see themselves as linked to the study of migration.
And we shouldn't even have to ask this question, but here it goes. Why is this field of study important in today's day and age in 2025?
Yeah, so I think, for a number of reasons. So it's really important because people and animals move, and they have for eternity. And so the way we think about those movements, how we understand them, how we understand the barriers that come up when usually man-made barriers, whether they're borders or dams or fences, is a really key topic to understand how the outcomes that the people who are moving are getting, how the receiving and sending communities of people and wildlife, what are the implications for this is a really important question for us to ask. And I think we also think a lot about sort of how representations of this and what that means. So how do we understand migration? How do we think about this topic? What sort of images and media and art and the like do we see, and how does that shape the way people talk about migration? And vice versa, how is that shaped by kind of the public conversation about it? And I think, that's obviously really salient today when folks who have moved are, in a lot of cases, being villainized and victimized.
Right.
And that's also not new. Certainly we have lots of historians that are linked to some of this too, that they think about how this has happened over time. But I think those topics feel really salient today when it's a really present question in our political sphere about what migration means and what the implications of that are.
Right. And, I think what's so fascinating is that, as you just mentioned, right, you have people across campus, across disciplines who all somehow are involved with migrations. And I think thinking about the perspective of language, right, migration, movement of people, certainly that is a big factor. Are there any specific projects that have already been happening or that might be in the works that relate to the aspect of language?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there has been a lot of really interesting work that folks have been doing, led by Beth Lyons at the law school, thinking about language and how we talk about immigrants and migrants broadly. There has been some work thinking about this, especially on social media. And so they've been scouring Twitter, now X, to try to understand what is the narrative that's happening and what sort of xenophobic speech is happening with regard to people who have migrated, and trying to get a sense with the xenophobia meter of how we can understand what that's saying about the public discourse on this topic.
Interesting.
You also bring in speakers and host events. What are some notable recent events you've held?
Yeah, so just a couple weeks ago, there was a screening of No Other Land, which is the Oscar-winning documentary that didn't necessarily find an initial wide distribution in the U.S. at Cornell Cinema that we co-sponsored, and the postdoc in the Migrations Program, Savina Axter, spoke at the panel discussion related to that. We've had a whole host of events and have some more upcoming that have tried to bring together some of the campus conversations about migration and how we can think about it. And there are a lot of different angles that this has taken. So there was a really interesting conversation between Amanda Rodewald, who leads the Lab of Ornithology, thinking about birds and the linkages between bird migration and human migration. So she spoke with Maria Elena Hinsape about this tie between how we understand bird migration and human migration and what we can learn about the similarities and also the differences. And so that was an eCornell event that's still available online that can reach people as well.
Very cool. What opportunities are there specifically for Cornell students, for faculty and staff, and maybe also for the community at large thinking about the migrations program?
Yeah, that's a great question, too. So we have a bunch that we're thinking about. So for undergraduates, we have an undergraduate minor in migrations. And so that's a really great opportunity for undergrads to think about the core set of coursework that they can do to really understand this topic. And alongside that, we also have an undergraduate migration scholars program. And so they're actually this semester organizing a couple of great events coming up on April 21st and 22nd, which I can share some more information about those. So the first is called Margins and Mobilization, Migrant Worker Precarity and Power in the Trump-Era Economy. And that's going to be a panel featuring Allie Wayne, a human rights organizer based in Syracuse, Shannon Gleason, a professor of labor relations, law, and history at the Industrial and Labor Relations School, and M. Cornejo, an assistant professor in the Department of Communications at Cornell. And so the undergraduate students decided what they wanted the event to be about and organized the panel, invited the speakers. And it looks like a really wonderful event. So we're really excited about that coming up. And likewise, a second group of students also organized an event on Tuesday, April 22nd, called From Colony to Diaspora, Enduring Legacies of U.S. Territorial Rule in Puerto Rico and the Philippines. And that event is going to feature Christine Balance, an associate professor of performing and media arts and Asian American studies, and Rebecca Hay-Colon, an associate professor with a joint appointment in the Department of Literatures in English and in the Latino Studies program at Cornell. So that's just a couple of examples of some of the ways undergraduate students have gotten involved. And we're also thinking a lot about how we can tie in graduate students further, and I think have some upcoming plans to link them both across disciplines on campus, and also think about a graduate fellows program on campus as well. And those are sort of relatively new initiatives. And in addition, we also have what I think is a really neat way to think about migration here in our own community at Cornell, which is a creative writing and art competition that runs every year where people share their own reflections on migration in their communities and beyond. And so that has been a really neat way to think about how people are seeing themselves and their communities and migration topics there. And that it's been traditionally open to undergraduate students, and this year we're really excited to include staff. And so that's something we'll carry forward as well. And we're also planning an exhibit outside of Mann Library this coming fall, where you'll be able to see the winners of that competition. The current round is still under review, actually, but you'll be able to see the winners there starting in the fall. And we are also thinking about a way that we can invite people to also represent their own migration journeys as a part of that exhibit too, so that you can see the ways others have shared some of their own work about it, and also put your own story in the space as well.
Amazing. You've already talked about a bunch of events that are slated for the near future. What else is coming up, and are there additional future plans for the program that you're excited about?
Yeah, thanks. So another thing that I think I'm really excited about that I wanted to mention too is that we also are planning some additional work with Cornell Cinema. So some of the original Mellon grantees, some of the things that they created were films. And so some of them have been shown at Cornell Cinema already. And we're hoping to bring back some of those really popular films. So, for example, Possible Landscapes by Natalie Melas and Tau Dufour, a project that they had worked on, as well as additional films about migration to bring together some of these representations in media, and along with conversation from folks that worked on them or have reflections from their scholarship relate to them as well. So I think that'll be a really neat series that is open both to the Cornell community and the wider community as well.
Nice. That's wonderful. Katie, where can our listeners find out more about the Migrations Program?
Yeah, so we have a Migrations Program website that's linked to Cornell's Einaudi Center.
And we will add that link in the show notes.
Yeah. That is probably the easiest way to get it. And so that website is one place, and we also have a newsletter. So signing up for the newsletter is also a great way to stay connected to some of the things we're doing. And we're cognizant that some of the folks that are part of that newsletter are at the Cornell community, but also that folks that are part of that group are reaching much further beyond Cornell as well. So so it's a wider audience too.
Wonderful.
Well, Katie, it is so great to hear about the wonderful work that you're doing in the Migrations Program. We're very happy to have had you here. But before we sign off, we'd like to ask you for a word in a language you love, are learning, want to learn, that makes you feel good. What's that word?
I really like the word oyaure, which is how you say good morning in Luo. And I like it because both it's a really nice greeting, and I just really like the kind of cadence and sound of the word, and always have.
Can you say it one more time for us?
Oyaure.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for speaking of language with us today, Katie, and thank you for this amazing work that is coming out of the Migrations Program.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here with you all today.
Join us next week for the last episode of this season. We will follow up on our recent guest speaker, Sarah Lee, who will share important insights on dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, and how to encourage and support all language learners. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
and follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.